these maps up in my presentation represent, or an analysis or a summary of 4, 5, 6, 7 plus separate maps that had these green dots up in them, and we consolidated the dot information. So what you can see here is the green dots were areas that we wanted people to highlight that they felt reinforced Flagstaff's character. Because part of this effort in rewriting the zoning code is making sure that this zoning code works to reinforce this unique character. And is very much place-based, or what we call place-based. And so what we did from this, I'm not going to talk extensively because I'm going to give you the opportunity to come up to the maps afterward, because we've actually done summaries on the sides of these posters. But you can begin to see areas where there's a lot of dots aggregated. And those are the areas where we begin to focus our efforts. And what you can see in this map is that the downtown area, especially sort of north of the tracks, the core of downtown, and just north of downtown, the neighborhood's got a lot of the dots. And we continue to hear that the downtown, in addition to the natural context, is what people feel sort of identifies and creates the unique identity of Flagstaff. So that's something we need to continue to talk about and reinforce in the code. The second of the dots are areas that you all that participated felt could use some improvements, that could sort of, there's areas of opportunity for maybe some small scale opportunities to make places better. And as you can see, the areas that started aggregating the most dots were south of downtown. We begin to see some dots, even sprinkled throughout the rest of town, but I think really south of downtown, areas basically encircling the area. I think what we'll do in this, and I'll let you go up and see the summaries, is a lot of the dots ended up south of downtown and in the 4th Street area, sort of to the east of town. So those are a couple of areas that kind of begin to raise flags and areas of focus for us as we begin to look at the community and look at the code. And then the red were the areas that needed major improvements, or that people felt provided real opportunities for improvements in the Flagstaff area as a whole. And as you can see here, once again, the south of downtown area, just to the south of the tracks, between the core of downtown and the university, were reinforced. You can also see another aggregation to the east of town in the 4th Street area. Those were the two that got the most dots, once again, in terms of opportunities and areas for real opportunities for improvement. And then there are other dots sprinkled throughout the town that we do not take lightly, and we go and make sure we understand what those are referring to, but we will really focus our efforts on the areas where there are a lot of dots overlapping. And then these are just combined results. And you can come up after the presentation and take a closer look at those and look at our summaries. In addition, at our previous trip, we actually had 2 half-days of stakeholder interviews. And this was a really extensive process, and it's a really tiring process, but we find it really invaluable in terms of kicking off the coding process. And this is just I'm going to let Lisa Wise come up and summarize this. Her office and her business partner Henry Pomparelli really led this efforts. But I just wanted to say that we interviewed over almost 60 people, and it's an estimated 70 hours of interview time. And Lisa's going to summarize the results for you, which I think are really informational to us, and hopefully you'll find them valuable, both just as sort of members of the sort of general community of Flagstaff, but also in your roles on staff or in these focus groups. Lisa.
Thanks, Dan. My name is Lisa Wise. A lot of you are familiar faces. As Dan said, we spent a lot of time in May, over a couple days, interviewing stakeholders from diverse backgrounds, generated a lot of good information to help us focus our research for the code and our resources. The purpose is really to identify issues and look at what was important for the community. what matters most as we kind of take next steps. There's lots of opportunities for the community to provide input. As you know, from participating on the focus groups tonight, the charrette. This was just one step, so this is a feedback loop, kind of looking at what we heard over those 2 days. This graph just shows the profile of the interviewed folks. About half of the people we interviewed were from outside of City Hall, so these are business owners, property owners, nonprofits, Chamber of Commerce, architects, engineers, people that are familiar with the code and really work with it professionally or through their agency. And about half of the folks were from more or less inside City Hall. We spoke to a lot of staff over those 2 days, and we also spoke to elected and appointed officials, City Council, and Planning and Zoning Commission. The responses we got from the stakeholders, and as Dan said, we interviewed almost 60 people, and that doesn't include the people I talked to a couple weeks ago, which would even make the numbers higher. We grouped the key issues into 5 major categories. Resources being the #1 category that was mentioned most often, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about what that is. Second, which is close second, was the design build spaces. Another important issue for the community was physical space, build characteristic, and within that design build spaces is mobility, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute too. And then the third major issue or idea brought up was process and administration. This is really getting a permit or application through the internal process and what that takes. And then we also heard a number of comments on what we grouped as livability. This is quality of life issues, historic preservation, affordability, and I have a little bit more information on that. And then economics and finance was also mentioned. So that's how we started to group our ideas and thoughts from the results of the interviews. This is looking at how the results came down by interview. So we grouped it by city staff, the private nonprofit sector, and then appointed and elected officials. Resources still came out on top. That was mentioned most often across the board, which I think is interesting and telling. Different groups had different comments, but resources is a really important concern and a high priority for the community. Design and process come in a close second, third, kind of across the board. With the nonprofit sector being a little bit more concerned about design, that's in green in the center, as you can see up there. Elected officials were a little bit more concerned about livability and affordability in some particular neighborhood issues. I think that's why that kind of popped up on the slide. And then the nonprofit sector mentioned economics and finance a little bit more, as you might expect. So digging down into these a little bit more, and I know this is a busy slide. See if I can have a cursor. On the top right, resources and natural environment, I just want to talk about that for a couple of minutes. So we grouped that into subcategories, resource management being the #1 subcategory. Then there we had resource protection was mentioned, stewardship, focus on sustainability, healthy forests. Those were some of the ideas that we heard under resources. And then water resources in terms of conservation, establishing great water systems, and stormwater, or other issues we heard under resources, natural environment related to water resources. I want to move across top to left, the process and administration. That was also a top priority. So we heard a lot about communication, the fact that the code was difficult to interpret. Code needs to be in plain English. A number of comments on it being too complex. So we've actually, if you were in the landscaping focus group a couple weeks ago, there was a 2-page analysis calculating landscaping requirements for buffer yards and whatnot. It's pretty telling about some of the complexity of the code. Other things we heard about in terms of process and administration, getting more down into code functions was not enough incentives, and the code can be unpredictable. And I think this is, to some of you, not new information, but it really helped us organize the interviews and organize our thoughts and kind of take the next steps to moving the code forward. I'm going to move down to the lower left, design build spaces, and talk about that for just a couple seconds. So on the built environment, some of the more specific comments we heard there was a focus on compact development, infill being a priority, and revisiting the design guidelines.